All right, I think we've about stabilized in terms of people popping into the webinar. Well, welcome, everyone. My name is Peggy Lowe, and I'm the rector at St. Albans Episcopal Church in Austin, Texas. And I happen to serve as the board president at EPN this year, EPN, where the church gathers. We're happy to welcome you to this workshop discussing the core administrative responsibilities of parish administrators and vestries. And we're so thankful that you're here and hope you take advantage of the multiple learning opportunities we have at EPN. All our workshops, you can see a schedule for the September workshops online. Our biggest event, our annual conference, is a wonderful opportunity to have these kind of discussions in person, to meet your colleagues face to face and make new connections. We're happy to announce that the 2026 annual conference will be held in Charlotte, North Carolina from March 3rd to 6th. And we hope to see you there. The registration should go live sometime in mid-October. Just a couple procedural items before I turn everything over to our panel. First, this session is being recorded, and so you'll receive an email with a link to the recording and any additional materials provided by the panelists once they post to our website's workshop library. We try to get this out within 24 to 48 hours at the conclusion of the workshop. Also, the Q&A function is disabled for all of our workshops. Please enter your questions into the chat, and the panel will answer them during and after the session as time permits. A transcript of the chat will also be available alongside the recording. Again, thank you all for being here, and now I'm happy to introduce Vanessa Butler, Executive Coordinator to the Presiding Bishop, who will start the discussion and introduce the other member of the panel. Vanessa.
Thank you, Peggy. Thank you for joining this afternoon. I am joined here by Nicole Free, who is the Bishop's Executive Assistant from the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania. This workshop is designed as a crash course on some of the basics of congregational administration. Any one of the categories we'll touch on today could in itself be its own workshop or several workshops. However, we're hoping to provide you with some starting points and resources to make administration more clear and efficient in your contexts. As Peggy said, you're welcome to ask questions in the chat as we go, and we've also left some time in the end, so in case there are questions that are lingering, we'll have some time then. First, let's talk about how we look at a church administration in general. It's often looked at as the boring, unnecessary stuff that takes time and energy away from real mission and ministry. I'd remind us that administration is listed as a spiritual gift in 1 Corinthians, and some pretty significant figures in the Bible, including Joseph, were quite gifted in administration and governance. Administration is mission, not apart from mission. So rather than think, if I could just get through these forms and financials, I could get to actual mission and ministry, I like to look at it as the better and more efficient we are at the mission of administration, the better we can accomplish more of God's mission in the world. So now I'm going to pass things off to Nicole to talk about our first area, deadlines and reports.
Thanks, Vanessa. Let's talk about reports and deadlines. Deadlines are established by the Episcopal Church or by your diocesan office or your canons. The first thing that we'll talk about today is parochial reports. Parochial reports are due March 1st. They're submitted through the DFMS website. Vestries should review and approve the report before it is submitted. Once March 1st comes around, the DFMS website closes and parishes are no longer able to submit their parochial report. At that point, you'll have to reach out to your diocesan office for help. In addition to parochial reports, each year, parishes may be asked to fill out assessment pledge forms. Those are submitted to the diocese, and it's the parish's commitment to meeting that pledge that was given to them by the diocesan office. Each diocese has their own formulary. Parishes should also have an audit every year, but it may not be practical for every parish to do that. So there are some other options instead of an audit, such as a parish review, self-audit, or process review. These should also be submitted to the financial office at your diocese. Once a parish has their annual meeting where they vote in new vestry members and elect convention delegates and alternates, this information should be reported to your diocese. In our diocese, which is Central Pennsylvania, I have created a vestry membership and parish leaders form and a convention delegates and alternates form. Those forms are sent out to each parish at the beginning of the year to submit to the diocesan office after they have their annual meeting. Depending on your diocesan deadlines, or sometimes there is a date that's listed in the canons, that is when your due date to file these reports are due. You can find out when those forms are due by contacting the diocesan office or reading your canons. Each diocese is different in what they require for a bishop's visitation. We have parishes fill out a visitation worksheet that contains all the information that the bishop needs to know, such as how many confirmations there'll be, who is going to be confirmed, received, reaffirmed, what color vestments the bishop is to wear, what the readings are for the day, and then any other important information that the bishop needs to know. There may be a form to fill out that lists the names, ages, confirmation information about those confirmands. While these aren't necessarily reports, next slide, please. Vestries, clergy, and parish leaders are responsible for attesting, signing, and submitting forms for ordained ministry and licensed ministry. For ordained ministry, during the exploration phase, a parish discernment committee will complete a form to send to the Commission on Ministry. The vestry and rector must sign that form of support, which pledges to contribute financially to the person's preparation for ordination, and that they declare the person fit for admission as a nominee to holy orders. Then similar endorsements or letters are required when a person reaches candidacy and ordination to the diaconate and the priesthood. Endorsements must be signed and dated by at least 2/3 of the vestry members, signed by the rector or priest in charge, attested by the clerk of the vestry, and then they're submitted to the bishop's office. Licensed lay ministries such as Eucharistic minister, Eucharistic visitor, preacher, and worship leader are all examples of licensed ministries for lay persons. There are certain steps to becoming licensed to serve in one of these ministries in a parish. When the steps of the process have been completed, the person, along with the rector's support, can request a license from the bishop's office. Are there any questions about forms, vestry reports? Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa to talk about record retention.
Another backbone of congregational administration is records retention and management. Most of what I'm about to share comes from resources of the Episcopal Archives. For those who don't know, the Episcopal Archives is a department of the church-wide staff. The Archives maintains the permanent records of the Episcopal Church and serves as a resource for dioceses and congregations for record and archival management. Their website will be listed here on a slide and will also be on a resource page that will be shared with the recording of this webinar. A full records retention booklet and other resources can be found on their site, and a couple of those resources will be shared with the administration resource page. The staff of the archives are also open to advising on specific archival questions if you call or email them. The vestry and employees of a congregation have a responsibility to make sure that an adequate record of their congregation's activities are maintained. Records are the property of the congregation and should not be treated as an individual's personal files, and thus should be kept at the principal place of business. If a congregation cannot keep their physical archives on site, it is recommended that you consult with your diocese about acceptable outside storage solutions. Increasingly, records are electronic. The Episcopal Archives has very detailed guidance on how to handle electronic records. However, good rules of thumb are to isolate the records that are archived into their own separate file section. At least 2 copies of those electronically archived files should be created and maintained. They should be on a combination of hard drives, external drives, or cloud storage, so that there is redundancy. One note on digitizing existing physical records. Digitization is a preservation strategy and not a replacement for important permanent records, like sacramental records, acts of incorporation, and vestry minutes. Do not destroy or throw away important originals, even if you're digitizing them for access and preservation. So, what are the records that need to be maintained, and how long do they have to be kept? Let's take a look at some of that now. Some records should be kept permanently. Those include acts of incorporation and bylaws, including the previous versions of your bylaws, audit reports and annual balance sheets, bequest and estate papers, deeds, building plans and drawings, insurance policies, and sacramental records. Other records need only be kept for a time certain. For example, many financial records, such as bank statements, canceled checks, and invoices and paid bills for operating expenses, are to be destroyed after 7 years. Quarterly and monthly balance sheets can be destroyed after 2 years. One tip I would have is at the end of the fiscal year, place financial records that are to be destroyed in 7 years or less together in a box, marked with the year it's from and the year it's to be destroyed. That way, everything is in one place for audits and reference. There is no mistaking when the document should be destroyed, and it simplifies your timeline for record management. Other records that only need to be kept for a time certain include parochial reports, which should be kept for 5 years, and invoices and paid bills for capital expenditures. Those should be kept for 30 years and then reviewed to see if any of it should be permanently archived. That's a very brief list, but I would again direct you to the full list from the Episcopal Archives, which is 29 pages long, for a more in-depth breakdown. Are there any questions about record management? Okay. Seeing none. Another hallmark of solid church administration is well-run meetings to handle church business. Let's start by talking about vestry meetings. The way we approach and plan for our meetings directly impacts how effectively we work together as vestries, and even our ability to recruit new members to the vestry. There's a book called Consecrations, Blessings, and Prayers, which contains a prayer for meetings that I think articulates what a church government's meeting should be. Heavenly Father, be present with us now. Let all our deliberations tend to your glory and the furtherance of the gospel. Let our discussions be charitable and our conclusions fruitful. May the breeze of your Holy Spirit breathe among us instead of long-windedness. Let there be no fighting of corners or sacrificing long-term trust for short-term popularity. In short, dear Father, may this meeting end on time with your kingdom furthered. Through the one who used few words but to great effect, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So what goes into a vestry meeting that reflects that prayer? First, set group norms. Agreeing on group norms as a vestry is really helpful in setting expectations and holding each other accountable for your work and how you treat one another. Norms focusing on how we approach conversation, particularly when there is disagreement, can be very helpful. For example, it's okay to disagree, but it is not okay to blame, shame, or attack. Norms can also be set on how you conduct business. How long do we want our meetings to be? How long before a meeting do we expect an agenda, supporting documents, and reports so they can be reviewed prior to the meeting? Agreeing on these things ahead of time and adhering to them can do wonders for how smoothly business can run during meetings. It keeps confusion at bay and short circuits resentment over time wasted or the perception of a lack of transparency. I would encourage you to make provisions for an annual orientation for new vestry members to learn what the role of the vestry is and to review and update group norms and expectations, which is great learning for them and a great update and check-in for existing vestry members. Sure, Tom Hancock, I see the question and we'll come back to that as soon as we're done with this section. I mentioned agendas a second ago. In short, have them. I've seen vestries wander into meetings with each individual bringing a list of things they want to discuss, and no real clear plan on how to address all of it, or consideration of whether the vestry should be discussing those items at all. Someone, like a clergy person, a warden, secretary, or administrator, should be in charge of building and publishing the agenda for each meeting. Other members can and should have input in an agreed-upon manner. My typical business agenda would look something like this. First, prayer or spiritual component and team building. What I think is possibly the most important is the inclusion of prayer and other spiritual components in your life together as a vestry. We are the church engaged in mission, not just any other nonprofit board. Taking the time to pray and tend to our spiritual lives together engages the Holy Spirit in our conversations and mission and helps to build your vestry as a Christian community. Have an intentional plan for prayer for your meetings that someone comes prepared to lead. In addition to prayer, I've also seen lots of vestries make effective use of meditations, doing a book or article study together, and the usage of icebreaker exercises to build a sense of community and to dig deeper into your spiritual lives together. Then we're into business, starting with the passing of the previous meeting's minutes. I then break the remainder of the meeting into two sections, items for information and items for action. I typically take items for information first. These are items for either report or conversation that don't need a vote or aren't ready for a vote at this time. This could be as simple as saying written reports were posted by X, Y, and Z. Please be sure you review those if you haven't already. It could also be a more in-depth conversation, like a strategic conversation about mission and ministry. After items for information, I move to items for action. All of these items require a vote. I typically start with the monthly reported financials at a high level. One way to have this conversation in a more efficient manner is to send out a written narrative with the financial reports when they are sent out ahead of the meeting, with more detail and explanations of any anomalies. After the financial report, I would put in any business that is routine or that we're pretty sure will be an easy discussion and vote. I save more extensive and possibly contentious pieces of action for after that. That way, you have the bulk of the business dealt with and aren't trying to handle a lot of business after the energy in the room may have dissipated. Side note, if there is a contentious debate over something, I would recommend taking the time to pray in between the conversation and the vote. That often gives members the chance to take a breath and recenter themselves before decisions are made, and can also make the exit from that discussion and vote a little smoother. This is the way I typically form agendas, but there are a myriad of ways to do it. If you have agreed upon timing for your meetings, like you're trying to keep meetings to an hour, make sure the material on the agenda matches with that amount of time, or that there is a previously agreed upon extension of meeting time for more involved discussions, like on mission strategy or the annual budget. And how do you keep agendas in line with timing? First, make sure the business the vestry is discussing is actually an appropriate topic for the full vestry to discuss. Maybe the full vestry doesn't need to discuss if we need to buy new trash cans, because the vestry has already discussed the budget line for building needs, and the trash cans fall into that line item. It can also help to have written reports from people like the treasurer or a committee chair, rather than in-person reports from everyone. If what needs to be conveyed is purely informational, the written reports can be submitted prior to the meeting and don't need to take up time at the meeting unless someone has a serious concern about something. For more information on vestry meetings and development, I would check out the Episcopal Church Foundation's vestry papers. And their website for that can be found on this slide and on the administrative resource handout that will be shared with the recording of this webinar. Are there any questions on organizing vestry meetings? So there was a couple of questions previously about audits that Nicole answered in the chat. There's also someone asked about a good resource for examples or model policies for personnel. There is a business handbook from the Episcopal Church, and that is also a link to that is listed on the resource page that will go out with the recording of this webinar. And then there's a question, are monthly financials expected to be approved or just reported and discussed? They are expected to be approved in most places. I would check your congregational bylaws or your diocesan canons, constitution and canons for that, but in most places, I know they are expected to be approved. Any other questions on vestry meetings? There's a question, shouldn't the vestry bylaws be sent to the lawyer for the diocese for oversight? Yes. When you're going to revise your bylaws, they should have already been approved by the diocese and reviewed by the chancellor of your diocese when they were passed by the vestry. And if they haven't been, or if you update those, they do need to go before they are officially your bylaws. They do need to go to the chancellor of your diocese. Any other questions on vestry meetings? Great, I will pass it over to Nicole to talk about annual meetings.
Thanks, Vanessa. Annual meetings should be a reflection of the year past and also a plan for the upcoming year. The meeting should occur between the diocesan conventions, and you should check your canons or contact the diocesan office to see if there's a specific time frame. The vestry should report full disclosure of finance at the annual meeting. Income, expenses, assets, debts, and liabilities, as well as a budget for the upcoming year, should all be reported. Clergy and parish committees like building and grounds, hospitality, prayer teams should also prepare and give a report. It's good practice to provide written reports from these committees in advance. This allows parishioners time to read each committee's reports and formulate any questions, as well as it cuts down on the amount of time needed for verbal committee reports. At annual meetings, vestry members are elected. Delegates and alternates to the diocesan convention are also elected. Nominees should be posted prior to the annual meeting and are elected by a vote of eligible parishioners. Your annual meeting is a great time to kick off your capital campaign or strategic plan because that's the time when everybody is together. Are there any questions about annual meetings? The question in the chat says, when you say full financial disclosure, does that mean church staff salary transparency? Vanessa, do you know the answer to that?
In most places, the church staff salary transparency question, usually the church staff salary transparency happens at the vestry level. It does not necessarily mean has to happen at the annual meeting because the governance board of the congregation has had that full transparency and disclosure. So that is often at the discretion of the rector or the warden in the vestry on what of the staff salaries get reported. There's also, particularly if the church budget is being published online, there is privacy issues that do need to be adhered to when it comes to salaries for some of these positions, that there are concerns.
Thank you. All right, if there's no other questions about annual meetings, I'm going to turn it back over to Vanessa to talk about building and maintenance plans.
Thank you. All right, let's talk about buildings. We are blessed to have these wonderful resources and beautiful places to worship, and they take attention and resources to maintain. Staying on top of the condition of your building and having short-term and long-term maintenance plans can help maintain or repair your building in a strategic way, can help with budgeting, and will keep your property a welcoming, beautiful, and safe environment for people to engage in mission and worship in. The first part of making a plan for your building is assessing the state of your building. Oftentimes, because we see a space so much and it's so familiar to us, we look past the things we ought to be paying attention to. The too wide crack in the sidewalk, the misfunctioning toilet that everyone just knows to avoid, the gas cans to fill the lawnmower that are stacked up next to the boiler. We also can sometimes put our head in the sand when some things seem too overwhelming. If I just don't acknowledge that the roof is 10 years past its due date for replacement, it doesn't need to be replaced, right? Taking an honest look with open eyes at your building is a really useful place to start. I would suggest taking a trip around your church as a leadership team and really look at your property while using a written checklist or questionnaire as your guide. We're going to provide samples of both a short, simple property assessment checklist and a more involved building survey for your reference with a recording of this webinar. The simpler version of what I'm suggesting would look something like this. A very pared down assessment with either a simple scale of good, fair, poor, or a yes/no answer. It would guide you through various areas of your building, both exterior and interior, to assess their state. You'll note there is some information gathering, such as the year the roof was last replaced. You'll also see as part of the interior assessment that it asks for you to also make notes of safety issues, like fire protection readiness, as well as the state of housekeeping in your facility, in addition to the physical conditions of the building. Doing a simple assessment like this will give you a comprehensive state of affairs for your building to serve as a starting place for making your plan. If you're ready for a more in-depth look at not only the physical state of your building, but also some deeper issues regarding your usage of it, I would suggest using a more in-depth survey, like the one that we will provide, which I've cut some sections of to look at today. You'll see that, to begin with, those doing this building survey are invited to reflect on things like what their hopes are for the use of the building, and setting timelines and goals for the process. There's also a section on the history of the building that will not only be helpful to you, but also to those who will be stewards of the building in the future. When looking at particular parts of the building, you'll also be encouraged to reflect on the things like the context of your building. In the exterior section, there are questions that concern themselves with how your building fits into your neighborhood and points you to seek out others' impression of your building. Going space by space, you will look at not only the general physical state of each, but we'll look at things that are particular to that area, such as food storage for the kitchen, or instructions for those who aren't members who might be using the kitchen for outside events. In this particular survey, there's also a financial section that can lead your group through thinking through that aspect of things. After taking an honest look at your building, first, don't panic. The list can seem very daunting if you haven't done an exercise like this in a while. Then begin prioritizing and breaking down what is needed for your building. Some things will be very simple and can be done in no time at all, like moving those flammable cans away from the boiler. Others will be more involved or will take some financial resources that will require planning and saving. Work through what the priorities are, with special focuses on things that impact safety and soundness of the building. That new carpet in the parish hall will look great, but no one will see it if they're breaking their ankles on your crumbling front steps. Look at the dates of last replacement of items like roofing and HVAC systems that you figured out when going through the checklist or survey. Use those to project out when you'll likely need to think about replacing those big ticket items, and begin planning for where funding for those items might come from over that time frame. If you know ahead of time what you're planning for, it means you not only have time to save money, but also find possible grant opportunities, hold capital campaigns, and gives you the time to compare quotes from different contractors, not simply having to pay what the available contractor charges in an emergency that could have been prevented by planning ahead. And finally, make sure that whatever plan, whether it is a spreadsheet or a document of some kind, is in a place where multiple people can access it. This allows you to continue to update your maintenance plan no matter who is in leadership or on staff. So eventually you end up with not only a history of maintenance on the building in one place, but a continual plan that future leaders can use to continue caring for your asset. Are there any questions on building plans? Oh, thank you. One of our participants pointed out that there was a recent EPN facilities webinar with Smart Church Solutions, which they found very helpful. So thank you for that. Okay, then I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole to talk about Safe Church.
Thank you. The last segment that we'll talk about today is Safe Church, Safe Communities. I just posted a link in the chat that highlights the Safe Church policy of the Episcopal Church. It's a long document, so I'm going to highlight just a few of the things that are important in the policy. Your diocesan office should also have a Safe Church, Safe Community policies that you can refer to as well. So Safe Church, Safe Communities has replaced the former Safeguarding God's Children. And this was done as we move towards a more comprehensive training approach in that we are not just safeguarding children, but also vulnerable adults. The new training is rooted in our baptismal covenant and addresses issues of power, ethics, boundaries, and inclusivity. There are two policies, the Safe Church policy for the protection of children and the Safe Church policy for the protection of vulnerable adults. Both policies lay out practical ways to keep us all safe. Next slide, please. The updated policy was crafted by a task force set forth by General Convention and went into effect in 2018. It encompasses all new training materials. Safe Church, Safe Communities launched online classes 4 years ago with Presiding Academy that allows people to take courses online instead of having to attend an in-person training. There are currently 8 courses on Presiding Academy that comprises the Safe Church, Safe Community series. Every 3 years, Safe Church, Safe Community courses must be renewed either at an in-person training or online. Next slide, please. The model policy states that congregations must adopt a policy to protect children and youth and vulnerable adults that is consistent with the model policy and the diocesan policy. This policy must be posted in areas where activities take place, as well as given to all adults who interact with children and youth and vulnerable adults. Dioceses are required to conduct a Safe Church self-audit every 3 years. Each congregation is required to conduct a Safe Church self-audit annually and must report the audit to the bishop's office. You should check with your diocesan office to learn more. And finally, next slide. I'm sorry, not finally. The model policy also requires public screening or background checks for clergy, employee, and volunteers. State guidelines vary by state and also require background checks for clergy, employees, and volunteers. I'm in Pennsylvania, for example, is required to have an FBI background check, a Pennsylvania State Police check, and Pennsylvania Child Abuse background check every 5 years. Your requirements may vary by your state. Next slide, please. Clergy are required to send their Safe Church transcript and background checks to the diocesan office. Parishes are responsible for their own record keeping, which should be done through a Safe Church manager. In the parish office, Safe Church managers should keep a file for every staff member, vestry member, key holder, and volunteer in a locked filing cabinet. If there's ever an incident or investigation, parishes may be required to provide proof of such clearances in coursework. Altogether, this helps us create safe spaces where everyone feels welcomed, valued, and included. Are there any questions about Safe Church, Safe Communities? Thank you. Vanessa?
Okay, that brings us to the end of our session here. But we did want to leave some time for any lingering questions that you may have over what we talked about, or any other administrative questions that you might have. I did want to point out in the chat that we do have a retired fire marshal with us today, and they advise that you connect with your local fire marshal to go over a checklist for safety systems. This is referring back to the building section. It helps with keeping ahead of your inspection and makes it easier to collaborate on necessary upgrades for safety. Thank you. That's a great tip. Are there any other questions? All right, so the question, shouldn't the senior and junior wardens be aware of the state statutes for corporations before signing contracts? Who will be liable for the contracts? That is certainly something that the wardens and the clergy person, if you have one, should be aware of. If there's any questions of those, I would encourage you to contact your diocesan office, because they will also be aware, either the chancellor or a staff member will be aware of what your particular state statutes are. You need to be very particular about those when signing contracts and for liability issues. I agree.
There was a question about who a volunteer is. If you go to the model policy on the Episcopal Church, it lists who volunteers, what constitutes a volunteer, and of the volunteers who are required to get background checks and take Safe Church courses. Seeing no additional questions, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. Please feel free to reach out to Vanessa at the email address on the screen, or you can email me at my address as well.